So, why should someone who is training for aesthetics as their primary focus care about how much weight they can lift? I had a subscriber ask me that in the video comments this morning. And you know what? That's a good question. And I know some people are going to be like, Jason, why should we listen to you on this? You're not particularly aesthetic, and that's true. I'm really not right now. And that's okay. I'm in my 40s, and I'm not really trying to be at the moment. But yeah, that's actually a good point. But here's the thing. If I understand how the body works and you are training for the goal that I'm not training for, and I can help you understand how to reach your goal, and maybe you have much, much better genetic potential than I do to reach that goal, then maybe you should listen. Because I think most people who've listened to me for a while agree I have a very good understanding of how the body adapts to training and training programming. So let's delve into this a little bit. Now, when we talk about aesthetics, at least what people are thinking of as classic aesthetics, what are we talking about? We're talking about muscle size, body composition, body fat, and proportion and symmetry, right? There's a classic aesthetic look. And when people say that term, that's what they are talking about. That's what they're talking about. Well, you can't control your basic structure and shape. That's genetic. You can't change the shape of a muscle. All you can do with your personal aesthetics is to make muscles bigger, make them bigger in certain proportions, and control your body fat, right? That is what you have control over. That is the factors that you can control. You cannot control your bone structure nor the shape of an individual muscle. All you can control is the size of the muscles and the amount of body fat covering them. Well, the amount of body fat covering them, let's be frank here, your training is a secondary concern for that. I'm not saying lifting weights and cardio don't affect body fat, they do, but diet is the primary driver of your body composition. Everyone agrees with that, unless you're such an extreme athlete that you can literally eat anything you want and burn through it because you burn through so many calories. But let me explain how that works. That isn't you. And sure, a couple of those people might even listen to this video and chime in and say, well, that is me. Well, you don't matter to everyone else, because less than 1% of people are going to have this problem or this situation. It's not really a problem if it's what you choose to do. That's not everyone listening. So that person doesn't matter. So for all of you, ultimately, what does your training come down to then? Muscle size. How much overall muscle growth can you stimulate, and can you keep it in proper proportions? And here's where I'm going to go with this. When it comes to muscle size, I'm sorry, when you observe people over the years, people who come in and they do tons of nothing but bodybuilder style training and they don't use drugs, in my experience over the years, they just grow slower and they spend more time in the gym. I'm not saying they can't reach the goals. You know what? If you do nothing but cable press downs and flies for your pecs and triceps and different sorts of lateral raises for your delts, you will probably eventually get them at the biggest size or close to the biggest size you're going to get to natural, right? You will eventually. But how many years is it going to take you? And how many hours in the gym each week is it going to take you compared to someone who gets really strong on the bench press and the overhead press? Or comparable variations. They don't have to be those exact ones. It doesn't have to be the exact strict standing barbell press and the flat barbell bench press, but those lifts work pretty good. The reality is getting strong on big compounds is something you can do easier over time. The amount of strength that you have is going to determine roughly how big a muscle gets, because tension, overload, and workload are what stimulate hypertrophy. In other words, a bigger muscle is a stronger muscle, and a stronger muscle is a bigger muscle. Now, those ratios can be shifted slightly. There are some forms of training that will make you stronger faster than others, but the end result is the same. The end result is the same. As you get stronger, you will get bigger in a certain proportion. And that's on every exercise. I don't care if we're talking about a bench press or a barbell curl. The muscles involved will grow in relation to how strong you get over time. So when I talk about how much you can lift being important, I'm not talking about necessarily 1 rep maxes 1 rep maxes are just a proxy for overall strength. You can actually get very strong and get massive without ever doing a 1 rep max, but you will have to continually increase the load on the bar. And that's rather the point. And when we step back and we talk about strength, we're talking about big compound movements usually, because you can train big compound movements over time. It is very difficult to create progressive overload with smaller exercises and isolation movements. It is. They don't train the same way in the long term, because you can't keep adapting the neurological component and rotate through different training styles to get a slightly different training effect to overcome plateaus. They don't work that way. You need multi-joint movements in order to be able to sustain progress over time. Your isolation movements tend to increase over time based on strength you gain in the big compounds in ratio to those. In other words, your curls will stall eventually and you won't get stronger on curls if that's all you do. But if you do rows or chin-ups, your biceps will get stronger and allow you to curl more and add more volume over time. Does that make sense? But at the end of the day, we know the big compounds, based upon every study done, can build just as much muscle in the same muscles that the isolation movements can. In other words, we know rows, lat pull downs, and chin-ups will build as much biceps as curls do. There have been multiple studies testing this. It's confirmed over long periods of time. The isolation movements have no advantage there. But the compounds allow you to train them easier, sustain increases in workload over time easier, and more importantly, you train more muscles in each workout. So in other words, if you wanted to make your triceps, your chest, and your delts as big as possible, bench press and overhead press, 2 exercises, will actually accomplish that faster than if you came in and tried to do a bunch of isolation movements to hit all those muscles. In fact, if you put insufficient workload on both of those, it may not be necessary to isolate any of the muscles involved. Now, I'm not saying it's bad if you choose to do so, but it may remove the necessity. Ultimately, getting strong on big compounds is how you're going to add the most size. Now, some people are going to protest and say, are you saying doing nothing but squat, bench, and deadlift will make me aesthetic? No, I'm absolutely not saying that, because I think it won't. I'm of the opinion that if you got as strong as possible in those 3 lifts and did nothing else, you probably wouldn't achieve. In fact, I'm not even going to say probably. I'm going to say 99% of the population genetically is incapable of obtaining the classic aesthetic physique doing just those 3 lifts. I'll say it's impossible for 99% of people. But what happens if you get really strong on the exercises that bring up the weak points aesthetically for those? Look at what people, both Martin Berkham and the Golden One, are perfect examples of guys who talk about taking those lifts and adding a couple others, like the overhead press, the push press, the weighted chin up. Here's what I'm suggesting, that for anyone who is chasing classic aesthetics, if you get strong on several of the classic exercises as strong as you possibly can, you're going to build as much muscle mass as you can build. You're going to do so with the most efficient use of your time. And if you do put some extra focus on the lifts that will bring up the aesthetic weak points, how about strict standing presses, overhead pressing, and chin-ups? Well, what muscles are involved in those? Yeah, we know the overhead press works a lot of muscles. But what does the overhead press hit that some of the other lifts miss? We know it works a lot of the muscles squat, bench, and deadlift do. It works the long head of the tricep more than the bench press. That's the hardest part of the tricep to grow. It works the entire delt and shoulder girdle more, and it works the upper chest more. Well, what is it that we think of as muscles that lag for most guys aesthetically? What stops you from being as aesthetic as you could possibly be for some athletes and strength athletes? Needing more total deltoid, more trapezius, more bicep, more tricep, more upper chest. A bunch of that gets addressed by the overhead press, doesn't it? It works the traps, it works the entire shoulder girdle, it works the triceps, but importantly, it works the long head, and it works the upper chest. What about chin-ups? Chin-ups, according to all the data we have, are quite possibly one of the best bicep exercises of all time. If the stronger you get, the bigger you get, wouldn't getting very strong on weighted chin-ups give you relatively impressive biceps compared to your genetic structure? Of course it would. It also gives you a wider back for that V taper. It works the trapezius, the rear delts, and to some extent the side delt, so it will finish out the delt development. What does it also work? It works the long head of the tricep in a stretch position, and it works the upper chest. So what I'm suggesting is that if a person wanted to get really aesthetic, if they got as strong as possible on the standing barbell press, or any standing press for that matter, and weighted chin-ups, I think that if they combined that with other classic lifts, I think that they would get it about aesthetic as their particular structure will allow them to get natural, as long as they diet down to an acceptable body fat percentage. I think that's your ticket, and I really think that's all there is to it. And you know what? And if a person did that, and at the end of the day they felt like they should do some curls or some tricep extensions or a little bit more delt work to bring those areas up, well, that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But ultimately what this comes down to, why should a person who cares about aesthetics care how much they should lift? Because it will help you reach your goals faster. And I'm not saying every single exercise across the board, some are going to be more important than others, but how much you can lift will absolutely determine how much muscle you can gain for you as an individual. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.